Find out that she was not even a real part of it. The things she was trying to insert herself into were not, in reality, her story to tell. And guess what? It's not like she followed her own advice either. After going online and ranting about how everyone should stay quiet, we then found Rosie on Stefan's TikTok panel talking about it. The same guy who's a predator by Rosie's own admission and who's been accused of many things. Yet there Rosie was, seemingly to satisfy her own need to stay in the spotlight.
The first thing I want to say out the gate, because it seems to me it's pretty clear that you haven't seen anything that's come directly from me and my content, because I don't involve myself with the LCU. I think that shit's disgusting. I will never involve myself in the LCU. And I am frustrated that all of this is even involved in that universe, because that's grimy garbage content. I called it moldy hot dog water, to be specific. I don't want to be involved in it at all. But I want to state that this entire time through this process, the timing of Shay's passing is horrible. Regardless of my opinion of you or any person involved, anyone who knew Shay is a human being and deserves grace and time to mourn. And this is a layer of complexity that is deeply upsetting. And I had no relationship with Shay. I never interacted with her. I barely even knew about her or of her. So I won't speak on her as a person, and I haven't this entire time. And I will never want to disrespect that. And regardless of my opinion of you, which I have many, and I'm the kind of person where if I say something behind your back, I'll say it to your face.
It's also ironic how she claims she's not the type of person who talks behind someone's back when she did not say anything to Zach's face during the whole parasocial situation. When the whole drama with Zach happened, she simply apologized, acted sweet, and then went online later to accuse of being a and even claimed he was preparing her to be his next lol cow, while in reality, he was just trying to help her because she was begging for it in his DMs. This is horrible.
I'm not going to sit here and pretend that, you're someone I would want to be friends with. But I will sit here and say that you're a human being, and that was someone that was close to you. And you have your right to your grief. At the same time, in that grief, I think there's room for grace. However, I find it interesting that was your first response to when you were acting out in your wrongdoing towards the situation, toward me specifically. Because yes, you are grieving, and there is a layer there where I find understanding, and I don't ever want to discredit that. But I do want to point out that was your first response, instead of just holding the accountability for your actions that I do have in screen recording that the words you did say.
And as you can see, she keeps talking. Shay's a girl who was featured in the docuseries but has now sadly passed away. And she's speaking as if she actually cares about her while sitting on a live stream with the cause of the situation. This guy who keeps talking about how they're all having discussions like adults, this is just insane. And as you can imagine, many of the women who've been hurt by this whole thing, and Stefan himself, these women definitely did not think that Rosie was on their side or had any empathy for them. In fact, one of the victims even ended up calling Rosie out on a live stream.
By going to him, because it's like, you are not a professional mediator or anything like that to resolve this situation. And this has been going for years and years and years. There's so many people involved, and we don't want you to speak for us. And I feel like you were trying to speak for us. I don't give you permission to speak for me.
But Rosie's always drowned in her own self-pity and is honestly very self-centered because she didn't seem to care much about these people and their trauma. And she finally went on a live stream to talk about her own issues. Classic Rosie behavior.
I just wish that all of these people who are giving these victims the respect they deserve would just hold a modicum of respect from my trauma.
And oh, guess what? She did all of us a favor in the days leading up to the premiere of the documentary by going out of her way to shut up. And while it would have been really good for her to remain silent, she decided to speak anyway. Once again, she repeated that if she was not a victim of Stefan, that did not mean she did not deserve to be in the documentary. She insisted again and again that she also had trauma and that her trauma is real.
Just because I'm not a victim of Stefan does not mean I am not a victim of and exploitation in my past. And just because you may not understand why I'm in the dock does not mean that I don't have a right to be there. I'm doing the best that I can from everything that's happened in the past couple weeks to not make problems for anybody else. I just wish someone gave a singular fuck about the fact that I'm a person with trauma too, and that trauma is real. The past several days, I have gone out of my way to shut the fuck up because It doesn't matter what I do. I am being relentlessly attacked. I just saw a comment on a video that had nothing to do with me, that was about me, and how I'm making everything about me when I wasn't even in the video. Girl World is using this opportunity to make me out to look like a fucking monster while creating the problem. I just did not anticipate certain parts of this. I'm not talking about the live stream stuff and all of that. I've said what I've said on that, and I'm culpable in that aspect. I'm talking specifically about how people keep saying actual victims. Watching people twist some of my most personal trauma into how I'm a liar. I think the big one I saw was when I was in those streams and I was being just barraged with hate. People were saying that I lied about, like, I said that I was basically raped over the internet, like, that all this stuff when they took a real traumatic experience out of context. In the We're All Insane podcast interview, I shared the story about what I believe was the first attack of my cyber stalker. How he blackmailed me, used the fact that I was, an ex-Mormon, afraid of my parents finding out that I was posting illicit photos online at the time because my parents and I hadn't had a lot of conversations and I genuinely was afraid they would disown me. And he collected my family's information and he coerced me into doing something I've never even told a therapist about. And that is just one of the things he did during an 8-year period. That story is real. I've never fucking lied about that or any of my fucking trauma. And I'm reaching to a point, I'm not engaging in reaction content about me. I'm doing my best to avoid it, but I'm getting so much in my DMs and in my own comments. People who put my cousin's names in my comments, who, by the way, is the man currently serving 30 years in federal prison for his shit with CSAM. Look, I get that I'm controversial and that I've recently fucked up. I'm just a person, man. This is real. This is real. I'm not lying. And I'm trying to do everything I can to not make things worse. But it's like I'm constantly caught between this push and pull of like wanting to speak out and defend myself and wanting to stay quiet to not cause more problems. All I know is I'm really anxious about tonight. Just because Stefan isn't the one that hurt me doesn't mean I wasn't hurt. Just because that isn't part of my story doesn't mean that I have something to add. I don't know, man. I just want to thank everyone who has sent kind messages. I know I spent a lot of time talking about the bullshit, but I appreciate everyone who has sent me kind messages of support or just checking in. I really appreciate it. The doc drops in about an hour and a half, and I think more than anything, I'm just anxious for everything to come after, but it'll be nice to just finally know, so we'll see. I hope that everybody tunes in, and we all find out together. I'm exhausted. Let's fucking go, I guess. Well, I just finished watching a docuseries with my boyfriend.
Honestly, we even mentioned in the very beginning of the video, while talking about her past, that she did deserve empathy for what happened to her in her childhood and afterward. But honestly speaking, she says that she wants the respect that other victims are getting, yet she's not doing anything meaningful with her experiences. She's just inserting herself into situations she's not really a part of. And according to us, there's a time and a place to talk about your own trauma and to listen to others. Just because you have trauma and experiences doesn't mean you can make everything about yourself. In conclusion, Rosie's the kind of person who consistently manages to make situations about herself, often inserting herself in the drama where she doesn't fully belong. Throughout this situation, instead of stepping back and allowing the actual victims and those directly involved to speak, she repeatedly positioned herself at the center of the conversation, which only added more confusion and tension to an already sensitive topic. That being said, we also want to acknowledge Michael Zachary for his coverage of Rosie, as he did a solid job breaking down key points of the situation. A lot of information we were able to gather also came from commentary creators online who've been covering the girl world and related discussions. We always try our best to cover every possible detail, but if we missed anything or made any mistakes, please feel free to comment down below and let us know. On that note, we'd like to end today's video. We'd love to hear your opinions about this entire situation and Rosie herself.
A 21-year-old university student gets out of a taxi just a few minutes from her home, and in the space of an ordinary walk, she disappears into the night. What makes this case hit differently is that she wasn't missing. Someone had found her. A man lurking in the shadows, but it wasn't by chance. He wasn't improvising. He wasn't spiraling. He had been practicing night after night in the same streets, right near the college, testing how close he could get to a woman without being stopped. And I'm going to be honest, this is one of those cases that makes your stomach drop, because the timeline isn't measured in years, it's measured in minutes, and the warning signs were already there. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. And if you've never been here before, I am Kimberlea. It's nice to finally meet you. Now, if you've been here before, then you would know that whenever I need to take a break from all of the deep topics that I talk about on this channel, I like playing mobile games. And I'm always looking for a new one to challenge me. And I recently found one. It's so fun. I play it with my friends, and also you can play it with real life people from around the world. It's called Matchmasters, and they're the sponsor for today's video. And it's the world's first player versus player match 3 game. It's a match 3 game, but you're competing against an opponent in real time and you're trying to outscore them. The point is to match 3 pieces of the same color, and every move matters because you're not just matching colors. You're setting up combos, you're charging up boosters and power-ups, and you're trying to steal the win at the perfect moment. And I like a challenge. What I love is that it's one of those games where I feel like it's super easy to start it. And once you learn how to use the boosters and different modes, it gets really strategic. And if that's your thing, you're going to love it. It's honestly my favorite way to just feed my competitive side without, of course, getting stuck doom scrolling. I'll play a couple of rounds. I'll hopefully win, and I'll feel like I got that escape. But I also did a lot of brain work, and I like to compete against my husband. And whenever we lose, we have to do the chore that the other person doesn't want to do. Just try it. I'm telling you, it's a lot of fun. And this game is completely free as well. And there are no ads, which is rare. And if you want extra goodies, just download Matchmasters through my special link below in my description box, or by scanning the QR code up on the screen. When you enter the game through using that link or the code, you'll get an exclusive welcome pack, and it has a special gift that you won't get the same way if you just search it in the App Store. So definitely grab the welcome pack now and tell me, do you play to relax or do you play to win? And thanks so much to Matchmasters for making today's video possible. Okay, this wasn't intentional, but this is another case in my Evil Mind series. I just did one last week. Now, these stories are focused more on psychology, patterns, warning signs behind serious crimes, and of course, the real world consequences that they leave behind. And I am still perfecting this style. I gave up on it a couple years ago, but it is back. And I'm telling you, just bear with me. It's going to get better and better. It should feel different than my deadly deep dives, and that is on purpose. These cases are different in the way that I present the facts. They're more about leaving you with a sense that you can't make sense of the senseless. And these cases are just pure evil. So let's start on Thursday, the 31st of January in 2019. I'm taking you to the city of Kingston on Hull in East Yorkshire, England. I hope I'm going to be pronouncing these cities right, but bear with me, I'm trying my best. Now, it looked like any other student city at the end of a week. It was the winter time, so of course the air was cold and damp, and there was a heavy fog lingering across the city. Here and there, students were sitting on benches, talking to friends, looking at their phones, and the weekend was still a day away. But that wasn't going to stop students from making plans to fight off the cold with music, cheap drinks, and socializing. Amongst those seeking a good time that night and some relief from the winter night was 21-year-old Liberty Squire, who was known as Libby to those closest to her. Libby was a University of Hull student who was living in the city while studying philosophy. And like thousands of students across the United Kingdom, she was preparing for a night out with friends. And I'm sure you can imagine these kind of nights. Most of us can relate, even if you've never even been to college. Maybe you just go out with you and your friends or your siblings. But for Libby and many of us, these nights included a few drinks, some friendly banter, and maybe a bit of dancing. It had been the same familiar rhythm as countless other nights in this college town. The kind of thing that begins casually and ends quietly, and everyone finds their way home at the end of the night. Except Libby never found her way home. In the early hours of Friday the 1st of February, Libby vanished only a short distance from her house that she shared with other students on Wellesley Avenue. What Libby did not know was that her movements that night would put her directly in the path of a monster who was moving through these same streets with a very different purpose. He had no urgency, no destination in his movements, and he was prepared to wait for exactly the right opportunity to present itself. Most cases we dive into have a long runway, and what I mean by that is it might be years of escalation or one explosive moment. Maybe it's a perpetrator who spends months planning an attack or a person who just suddenly makes a simple, terrible decision. But this story is different. The escalation is already in motion years before Libby ever steps outside into the night in 2019. And when their paths cross, what happens next unfolds so fast that by the time anyone realizes that she's in danger, she's already dead. Investigators would later uncover that this perpetrator had been moving through these streets in this neighborhood, committing offenses that at the time were not taken seriously. And I know what you're thinking. Only later did those earlier incidents start to look like a pattern. It was connecting the dots backwards, as they say, when everything finally came together. You may ask the same question that I hear all the time. How many times? How many times does a woman have to report something to be taken seriously? And in this case, how many times does a woman have to report a very creepy stranger at her window before the system treats it like a warning instead of just a nuisance? It was the rapid escalation in a short period of time that makes this case so unsettling. There wasn't a lead up over many years, and there was no single dramatic moment that anyone nearby could recognize as dangerous. The timeline that night is measured in minutes, not hours or days. And those hours, days, and even months came after Libby disappeared. And even then, the full picture of exactly what happened will never be completely clear. And we can say that in a lot of cases because we can't know what a killer was really thinking. That stays with them. And this case stays with people who hear it because it forces a hard question about how risks are recognized and how warning signs are treated before something escalates. This story actually starts in a lot of cases towards the beginning point where Libby was refused entry into a club while she was out with her friends. And while I agree, that moment is very important, and we will get there, I believe it's unhelpful as a starting point because it frames everything that happened next as a consequence of a moral failure on Libby's part. In other words, it's simply victim blaming. And knowing this case well, in my perspective, the real starting point in the story is much earlier, before Libby even enters the picture, when she's not even in frame at all, when the pattern of this monster was just beginning. It was in the dark, one window at a time. So let me take you there. Years before Libby disappeared, there was another young woman in Hull, and we're going to call her Laura for privacy reasons. She was in her own home, and it was one of those ordinary nights where nothing feels like a true crime story until it suddenly does, and that should scare all of us. Laura and her boyfriend were sharing a private, intimate moment together, and we are adults here. I think you know what I mean when I say that and when I'm going to say things in a certain way in this video, because unfortunately I can't use the words I want. I want to be more direct, but this platform censors those type of videos, so I have to censor my words. But Laura and her boyfriend were being intimate together when all of a sudden she noticed something that didn't look right. Something caught her eye as her curtains on her window that was slightly open were blowing in the wind. The street light illuminated the space outside, and she could see a man with his hands and face poking through her curtains. A stranger watching them through an open window. There he was in the shadows, just lingering, not speaking, not knocking, just standing there long enough for her to register that something was happening. It was the sudden, sickening realization that a boundary that she didn't even know she was defending had already been crossed. And when her boyfriend looked up at the man, he retreated. Now later, Laura would describe feeling violated. And even years after that, she said it was still something that she thinks about all the time, and it weighs heavily on her mind. And because humiliation is part of the point for these creeps, the incident didn't even end at that window. Because afterwards, Laura's friend found a used condom and a pair of women's underwear left draped on Laura's door handle like it was a calling card, and that just disgusts me. But poor Laura was made to feel like she was blowing things out of proportion. She said, I don't even think my boyfriend took it very seriously. My housemates didn't take it seriously. I think they thought it was funny, but I didn't find it funny at all. She said that everyone else had played it down, but she knew something was very wrong. She said, I always had a feeling that this was going to be somebody who wasn't going to do it just once. And she was haunted by this experience. She had her locks changed. She had a camera installed. But she's quoted saying it didn't help her from feeling absolutely petrified. Those were her words, especially when she was home all alone. And it got so hard for her to feel safe in her own home, she had to sleep with garden shears in her bed just in case that man came back. She wouldn't even leave her bed to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. It's almost like she was a prisoner in her own home. And when this incident initially occurred, she actually did report it to the police, in case you were wondering, but it was filed away as weird or gross. And it was the kind of thing that people would tell her to just laugh off once her adrenaline faded and she wasn't freaked out anymore. But I'm going to give you insight that the police didn't have at the time. This wasn't a one-off incident. Laura was right. Between June 2017 and January 2019, this monster was lurking, and there were a string of women observed.
For procurement managers, Grainger is the go-to partner that helps keep your healthcare facilities ready for patients. Because there's
intruded upon and left with that lingering sense that their home wasn't fully theirs anymore. So hold on to that image of the open window, the drapes drawn, and the breeze flowing inside. Because we're going to come back to it. And when we do, it's going to explain why what happened to Libby wasn't out of nowhere, and it definitely was not her fault. Libby was born Liberty Anna Squire to her parents Russell and Lisa Squire, and she came into this world on New Year's Day, Thursday the 1st of January in 1998, in West Wickham, Buckinghamshire. Libby was a doting big sister to her younger brother and 2 younger sisters, and when her first sibling Beth was born, she literally turned to her mom at age 4, and she said, "Mommy, when is this baby going away?" And Lisa laughed and told her she was there forever, and little Libby rolled her eyes at her. And at 8 years old, her second little sister Maisie came along, and then 2 years after that, her brother Joe. And she was like a second mom to him. She adored him so much. And the way her parents spoke about her paints an early portrait that feels instantly familiar and tender. They called her their kind, thoughtful, beautiful girl, and said that Libby was a really happy child, the kind of girl who stayed deeply connected to home. She was described as extremely close to her family and siblings and held tightly in that everyday ordinary love that shapes you without you even noticing it's happening. And as Libby got older, she carried that closeness with her, not just with her family, but anyone she felt she wanted to be close to. At school, she built a really good group of friends that stayed connected with her throughout her entire life. And of course, they did the typical girly things, sleepovers, played sports together, and her mom described her as organized, hardworking, and committed to her studies. Her academic interests leaned towards language and the humanities, English language, English literature, and Latin. She was drawn to stories, meaning, and words that fit just right. Libby loved to read. She loved to go to the gym and travel and listen to music and go to concerts. Those small joys that make her life feel a lot bigger, louder, and more alive. And West Wickham Hill was remembered as part of her favorite places to be, the kind of spot you return to when you want that fresh air in your lungs and room in your own thoughts. At age 16, students in England take what's called the GCSE exams across multiple subjects, and they're graded from A as the highest mark down to lower passing grades. And Libby achieved really strong results. She earned 5 A grades, 2 A's, and a C, which placed her among high-achieving students. And A-levels are the next stage of education taken before university. And by the time Libby was due to sit for her A-levels, she was struggling with her mental health. This made studying really difficult, but Libby was determined to succeed. Despite her mental health challenges, she relied on her family and friends, and she was doing better. But unfortunately, she completed those exams with 2 D's and a U, which meant there was an ungraded portion where the required pass standard was not met. But Libby was determined to go to university. But first, she wanted to take a gap year to put some distance between her school years and her college years, and that makes sense. That could release some of her anxiety. She was doing better mentally. She traveled to Paris. She was excited about the future ahead of her. And when she returned to the UK, she then chose Hull University after visiting the city and just feeling drawn to it. By the time she started classes, Her family said she had worked hard on her mental health and was in a really positive place. She would even talk about a possible future career in journalism. But her mom really didn't want her to leave. She wanted her to stay close by. They were really close. It was really hard for her to let Libby go. But she was the kind of daughter who kept in touch almost minute by minute. Whatever was going on in her life, whether it was big or small, she would text her mom. She was always in communication, whether it was a minor ailment she was going through or whatever she bought that day, just random thoughts. She sent them to her mom. She would even send goodnight texts when she was finally in bed. But while she was away at college, she made a number of close friends. Her main group consisted of Ryan, Nathan, and her best friend, Amelia, who was also studying philosophy. She described Libby as patient, kind, but also joked that she was a bitch in the best way possible. She was a lot of fun. There are clips of Libby being silly before they headed out on town, basically throwing herself down the stairs and laughing. She had these big blue eyes that were so piercing, they could almost see right through you. She had dark brown hair and a personality that would enter the room before she even did. In her first year of school, she socialized a lot, going out almost every night of the week. But the thing is, she never missed a class. Second year, she and Amelia moved in together with 2 other friends. And because I live in the United States, I had no idea what Hull was like. But it was described as very walkable, friendly, and safe. I figured a little more insight might give you some context in case you're not familiar like I was. It's a residential area right around the college. We're talking apartments, homes, and even little restaurants lining the streets near the university. It's very walkable. Police are patrolling the area at night, and
Life doesn't wait, and neither should you. Aleve can help you deal with pain less throughout your day. Whether it's a long day on your feet, a demanding workout, or
Lisa, she didn't worry about Libby at all. She calls her daughter savvy, wise, and feisty, someone who could look out for herself. But her mom did say she was a little too trusting sometimes. Despite the improvements in her mental health and her life, Libby wasn't a perfect human being. I mean, who is? And her vice of choice was alcohol. But let's not make a judgment call here because you never truly understand someone's reasons. But I can tell you, for most college students, it was for fun. And that is what Libby and her friends were doing. They were drinking and they were having a good time. However, it's true that university life does have a problematic drinking culture. But Libby seemed to thrive. Friends who met her there at school described her as a bright young woman who took pride in everything that she did. She was funny, friendly, but private. She preferred to see people in person rather than chat online, and she was always up for a night out with friends having fun. In Hull, Libby lived in a shared house on Wellesley Avenue, which is part of the city with a lot of student housing. By her second year, after coming back from winter break, she was ready to reunite with her friends. She was doing all of the normal things that a woman her age and background would do. And I couldn't help but think about the Idaho case. Kaylee and Maddie and Xana and Ethan, college students living their best lives, having fun, being free before they graduated and started their careers. They had no idea a psycho killer was lurking in their quiet college town. They didn't know that he would come into their home and destroy all of that. In the same way, Libby didn't know that she was sharing a neighborhood with a monster. I call him the butcher in the window. His real name is Pavel Relevich. This is the man behind those open windows I told you about. The moments that seemed small, but they really weren't. Pavel was born on Saturday, the 25th of June in 1994 in northern Poland. He was only 4 years older than Libby, and he came to the United Kingdom in 2015 at the age of 21, the same age Libby was when her life ended. Pavel was looking for work and to build a life in the UK, and by the time Libby crossed his path, he looked ordinary on paper. A butcher working up in Malton, a husband, a father of 2 young children, someone who could pass as background noise in a busy city. And that's what makes him dangerous. Because people who knew him described him as a religious family man and a devoted father, while he was spending his nights doing the exact opposite of what a family man is supposed to mean. While being a husband and father should mean something protective, if anything, Pavel used his family as the perfect camouflage to make sure everyone only saw the normal life he wanted them to see, rather than letting them in on the twisted double life he was living. Now, this is important. There is not much reliable public information about his childhood or early psychology beyond the basics. And I'm not here to invent a backstory that makes his later choices feel inevitable, but what we can track clearly is the documented behavioral trajectory. 2 years after relocating to the UK from June 2017 onward, police started to get reports about a series of offenses that would later be recognized as part of a growing pattern. These incidents took place mainly in student areas of Hull and happened late at night or in the early hours of the morning when the streets were quiet and most people were inside their homes sleeping. These were not spontaneous drunken acts. They involved planning, late night movements, and clear positioning. Pavel would walk or drive through the residential streets after dark, targeting properties where curtains were partially open and the lights were still on inside. He would stand outside the windows, watching women inside of their homes. These women were getting changed, taking showers, or asleep in their beds. And in multiple cases reported to the police, the women would see a man outside of their window touching himself in the darkness while peering inside. That's how I need to put it, but he was pleasuring himself. And these incidents frequently occurred in the Beverly Road and Newland Avenue area, which are streets lined with shared student housing. So remember that location because it's really important in Libby's story. In addition to voyeurism, there were several burglaries that were categorized as being sexually motivated. Because during these break-ins, the intruder, who, remember, he doesn't have a name back then, but he didn't steal electronics or valuables. Instead, he targeted intimate personal items like underwear that were inside women's drawers or even in their dirty laundry piles. Used condoms would be left inside clothes baskets, and adult toys were even taken from bedside drawers. The burglaries often occurred in the early hours of the morning while the occupant was still sleeping inside, and that is very brazen. We talked about it in one other case I did recently. There was one incident reported to the police that happened in the Beverly Road area in late 2018. A woman reported a man attempting to actually open her door after previously seeing him outside her window. Other victims described noticing footprints in their garden outside, right under their windows, or disturbed property the morning after they felt like they were being watched. And that must have felt terrifying. And if that has ever happened to you, I am so sorry. And then on Sunday, the 20th of January, residents reported a man exposing himself late at night near student houses. This was just 11 days before Libby went missing. And despite many of these incidents and burglaries being reported to the police, no one was arrested. No one was charged with any crime. Most of them weren't even fully investigated at all. And unfortunately, these incidents escalated over time. Watching women through windows, breaking into their homes for intimate trophies, so to speak, and committing inappropriate acts in public, it's an inability to control the urge to self-gratify. And once this pattern starts, it doesn't stay minor. The perpetrator grew more bold because he thought he couldn't be caught. So when we talk about where the origin shows up in this case, it isn't a dramatic childhood story. It's the repeated rehearsals, the same street, the same targets, the same entitlement over and over until one night, the target is a real living person sitting alone in the dark. Libby Squire. If the cases had been followed up on, then maybe the connection would have been made that all of these crimes were connected. And if that happened, then there would be a pattern that would emerge, showing that the behavior was not just persistent, the stakes were getting higher. The perpetrator had gone from peeping to exposing himself to breaking into occupied homes. Each step increased the level of intrusion and risk. Each step required more confidence and honestly more disregard for the women whose privacy he was invading. If those reports had been connected sooner, it's possible that investigators might have identified a vehicle, a reoccurring description of a person, or they may have been able to narrow in on one individual across multiple incidents rather than treating them as isolated. If they had done that, they might have figured out that Pavel, the butcher, the husband and father of two, the monster, was living a conventional life during the day while engaging in evil deeds by night. And you may wonder, if he was married, why? If he was married, did his wife have any idea this was happening? If he was married with kids, were they ever in danger? There's no public evidence that his wife had any knowledge of his double life. And what's clear is that his family was a cover. And that's the part that makes predators like this so hard to spot and what keeps me up at night. Why I'm explaining all of this up front is because I want you to understand the psychology before we go into what happened to Libby and the aftermath. There's something called the escalation pathway. In Evil Minds cases, I like to dive a little deeper into why and have a teaching moment if possible so that we can be armed with knowledge, not just for this video, but because it can save a life and maybe even your own life. When people hear words like voyeurism or indecent exposure, they sometimes consider it like something happens when someone gets really drunk, or they even think it's funny. But it is a serious offense. And it's a concept that's worth understanding, what I talked about, the escalation pathway. In plain language, it's that an offender starts with low contact, low risk boundary violations, watching, then exposing, then lurking. And if he gets away with it, he learns, I can do this. I can get close. I can enter someone else's orbit and leave without any consequences. This isn't just curiosity. It's about proving that they can cross a physical boundary, and you'll never know about it until it's over. So keep that in mind, because these types of stories are not about what someone on the outside might see as a bad decision on the victim's part. No, it's about a predator who had already trained himself to recognize a vulnerable moment and act. Please keep that in mind. So now back to this case. In January 2019, Pavel, the monster, was already prowling the same student neighborhood late at night that Libby lived in. And by then, these streets were familiar to him. He knew the layout of the houses. He had been so familiar with the rhythm and the timing of when people came and went, local students from clubs and pubs. It was in that same small geographic pocket of Hull, just days after another exposure incident, that Libby would come home from that night out. It was on January 31st that Libby went out with her main group of friends, Ryan, Nathan, and Amelia, and they met up at another friend's house to drink and hang out. Later, they stepped out to go dancing at the Welly Club. It's a 2-level building that has indie music on one level and more of an emo vibe on the other. It's a place that they frequently went, and it's a very well-known student bar in the area. At 11:20 p.m., CCTV shows the group arriving, and Libby can be seen in a black dress and a black jacket wearing a pair of Vans sneakers. There's snow on the ground. It's cold out. And it may seem like an unusual choice to be dressed like that, but they're walking just a short distance, and they're getting back inside the establishment. So you're not standing in the cold for very long, or you're not planning to. But there were also many people that were wearing winter jackets and hoodies. Libby was seen stumbling a bit, but this wasn't unusual for her when she drank. And her friends would later say that she was not in any way unusually drunk. But tipsy would have been a good definition according to them, and they knew her. However, while having to stand in line in the cold, her demeanor started to change. She was wrapping her arms tightly around her. She was shaking and swaying, and it seemed like the cold was getting to her because she had been drinking. We're talking about 34 degrees Fahrenheit or 1 degree Celsius. January is the coldest month in the city. And there's also a wind chill that can make it feel even colder. Remember I briefly explained to you in the beginning that she was refused entry to the club? And that's the usual starting point for this story? Well, it's because the door staff believed that she already had enough to drink. And there are very strict laws in the UK under the Licensing Act of 2003. It makes it a criminal offense to allow someone who appears to be drunk to enter a pub in the event that they consume even more alcohol. So door staff has a duty of care. They're actually required as part of their job to refuse entry and even get the police involved if the person won't comply. So of course, Libby doesn't want to deal with that, and neither do her friends. And the staff member is not going to take any chances, because if they don't follow protocol, then they could be liable for what happens, and there could be penalties. The bar can actually lose their liquor license as well. And even though there's no strict legal definition of what drunk means, there are signs that employees have to take into consideration. Things like stumbling, staggering around, and slurred speech are enough. So as Libby's friends are providing their IDs, One of the doormen asked Libby to stand aside, to step out of the way. And you can see her in the CCTV footage. She's just waiting. And while she's there, they're observing her behavior. And it was decided she was not allowed inside. And I think all of us can understand that perspective of the bar staff. It's important to keep people safe. But here's the part that does more damage than good. Libby's friends were allowed inside. Only she was singled out. So they decided to do what they had done on numerous occasions when one of them wasn't allowed into a club, because it did happen. They called them a cab. So with Libby, they did the same so that she could go home. But she was alone. And you may be thinking again, why? Why didn't one of them remain with her? Was drinking and partying more important? And it can make me angry. But they did what they thought was the next best thing. To them, she didn't appear to be heavily intoxicated. She was talking to them, even though, it was very cold, especially with what she was wearing, so she was shaking. But they had done this a number of times. It was standard for them. This wasn't a far drive either. It was a few blocks away. They gave the driver her exact address on Wellesley Avenue, gave him money for her fare, helped her get buckled into her seat, closed the door, and they returned to the club. Now, it's true, no one went with her, but she did make it to where the driver was supposed to bring her. It was only minutes later, around 11:29 p.m., that Libby was dropped off just a few steps from her front door. That should have been the end of it. A short walk inside, a warm room, maybe a morning headache, but Libby never made it inside. It's not a taxi or an Uber driver's responsibility to make sure a drunk passenger gets in their home safely. And by 6 minutes after midnight, Amelia was texting Libby to ask if she had gotten home yet, since they hadn't heard from her. Now, there's something you need to know about Libby. She is not one to bring a purse out with her. She doesn't like holding anything, not even her keys or her phone. She had lost her phone in the past, so she had made a choice to leave it back at home. If you've ever been in college, someone else is bound to have a phone, so you would not be worried if you didn't. And she had roommates, so they could let her in and unlock the door for her. Her phone was in her room that night. But the first thing she would have done when she got home was get on it and text one of her friends to let them know she arrived. Since it had been about an hour since she left and she wasn't answering the text, they thought maybe it was because she already fell asleep. But it was really worrisome to Amelia, so she texted their other roommate to ask if they heard Libby enter the front door. And she said no, she hadn't. It was around 12:30 in the morning. It should not have taken her that long to get back. So that was concerning. But as many do, they assumed maybe she walked to get something to eat. Maybe she met up with another friend, and the list of explanations goes on and on. However, once her roommates got home and they realized that she hadn't arrived, and it had been nearly 2 hours and she wasn't answering her phone, that wasn't like her. When they went into her room, they were even more concerned because they found her phone. That explained why she wasn't returning their calls or texts, but it didn't explain where she was and why she had never come through that door that night. They knew that she didn't have her phone out that night in case it got lost. But now she was lost. And it's really easy to judge her friends. There's a lot of questions we can contemplate. How involved does someone need to be with another adult? Should it be required to accompany someone intoxicated? If you're asking me personally, the answer is simply yes. The rule is 2 in, 2 out, meaning if you and a friend go somewhere, both of you leave no matter what, no matter if one is still sober and wants to party. But not everyone has the knowledge from reading about or watching cases like this. Many students believe they're invincible, that their neighborhoods are safe. But they're not living on an isolated island. Anyone can venture into their safe space. It was at this point that her roommates decided to call the police. And here's a small portion of that call now.
Honestly, how can I help? Right, so my friend, he put her in taxi to get home, and then now she's gone missing. Right, what's your friend's name? Libby.
After that, Amelia called Lisa's mom at 1:09 a.m. Now, she didn't answer because she was working a night shift, but when she saw who it was, she quickly called Amelia back to ask if everything was okay. And that's when she was told that her daughter was missing. And Lisa said that she went numb. And it was in that moment she said she couldn't feel her daughter's presence like she usually did. And if you're a mom, you know what she means. She was like, Libby, where are you? Lisa started doing everything she could to find her. She was calling the hospitals in the area. She was calling her other friends, even the taxi company. And 6 hours go by. It's now daylight. Officer Gathorpe arrived at the Humberside police station to start his day. And I know in the UK it's Humber. I say Humber. But the first thing on the docket was following up on a missing persons report that was on his desk. He had her name, Liberty Squire. Her description, 5'7", Caucasian, slim, with blue eyes and dark brown hair. She's got a scar on one of her elbows and everyone calls her Libby Pie. His belief, because he had been doing this a long time and they would constantly get adults going missing in this area and they would turn up, he thought she might have passed out somewhere. Maybe she needed help since it was so cold outside, but he thought once the businesses start opening up in that morning, he's going to get a call. Someone's going to find her. In the meanwhile, officers did begin to go and contact her friends and family to find out, did anyone hear from her? But they did not. And this is completely routine to begin a search this way. It's not unusual for a person that's out drinking to not let their friends know where they are. But not turning up sometime later that morning by 8 a.m., that was completely out of character for Libby. And her friends were worried. And they were worried because she was drunk when she got into that taxi. They were thinking maybe she got lost when she got out of it, or that she got into some kind of trouble on that short walk home. Officer Paul Walker from the Major Crimes Unit had more officers going door to door in this area, but most residents said, we were asleep and we didn't hear anything. We didn't encounter anything unusual. All of her roommates and friends that she was out with that night were interviewed. And it was a very stressful situation, as you can probably imagine, because they felt a lot of guilt. It was starting to sink in at this point that this was really happening. There was some friends of hers that thought, you know what? This is an exaggeration. She's going to turn up. She's probably just sleeping at a friend's house. So they would just go about their day, attending class as usual. But Libby never showed up for any of her classes. And when the university informed Lisa, at that moment she knew this was very serious. She called Libby's grandparents. She told them, hurry, we need to leave. We need to get to Hull now. She said she was sick to her stomach. And time was ticking by. It was 12 hours that had already gone by, to be exact. And on that drive, everyone was very emotional. The whole family went. All Libby's siblings, her parents and grandparents. And at the same time, police were still scouring the streets. The standard procedure was to go 50 meters from where a person was last seen. They had contact with the taxi company by now, and the driver, his name was Steve, was thoroughly interviewed. He was an older man in his mid-50s, and he explained how Libby's friends asked him to get her home safe. And he could tell she was drunk, but he had seen people in way worse conditions. She was also angry, according to him, that she wasn't allowed to be with her friends and that she had to go home. He said she was kind of cussing under her breath, and he asked her, are you okay? And she said, yes, I'm fine. He said he dropped her right in front of her house. So that is where the search started, street by street. And this was intense. They were looking in underground drains. They were combing through brush. They were doing full-on line searches. Meanwhile, officers also started looking at CCTV footage from the area where Libby lived. They saw the cab driving onto her street, so they were able to at least confirm that part. It was only after piecing together snippets of CCTV footage from the most heavily surveilled cities in the UK that investigators began to understand how the events of that night actually unfolded minute by minute. The lead digital media investigator, James Grandage, was in charge of scrubbing through all of that footage. And he started with the nightclub. I showed you this earlier. The Humberside PD posted a tweet with Libby's picture, and it read, can you help find Libby Squire, 21, last seen getting into a taxi outside Welly Club in Hull? She's 5'7" tall, with shoulder-length brown hair, and was wearing a black long-sleeve top, leather jacket, and black denim skirt with lace. Now, friends from back home saw these posts, and they created posts of their own, including her friend from childhood, Rachel Christie. She pleaded with the public to please help her find her oldest and best friend and to please bring her home. And though a lot of these tweets and social media posts brought in a lot of tips, I'm sure you know social media can be more of a curse than a blessing, because some people would call in saying, oh, I just saw her, and they were in an entirely different country. That didn't help. But finally, back at the station, CCTV footage shows that within seconds of being dropped off by that taxi, Libby was unsteady on her feet. So she did what probably felt right to her in that moment. She took a seat on the sidewalk, right near a bench on Beverly Road, just for a short period of time. Do you remember that location from earlier? This is where Pavel's hunting ground was, and Libby had walked straight into it, like a fly into a spider's web. During this time, the CCTV footage showed Libby exhibiting signs of intoxication. And remember, police had already had comments from her friends, but seeing it was more proof of her condition. She was rocking and unsteady, and even sitting down, and given how cold it was that night, officers also believe that she might have been experiencing hypothermia. And if you catch yourself thinking, why didn't she just, and then you want to fill in the blank, why didn't she just go straight inside her house? Why didn't she do something different? I'm going to ask you to pause. That question assumes that she was making clear, rational choices in a moment where her body and her brain were not fully cooperating. The more useful question is, why was a man like Pavel still out, prowling after all of those reports? Around 11:40 p.m., a person in a car stopped briefly and they checked on Libby. That driver later told police they were also a university student and they lived on the same block. And when they stopped, they asked Libby if she needed help, and she said she was okay. But again, she's not acting rational, and it's not a passerby's responsibility to do more, so they left. Between approximately 11:35 p.m. and 11:40 p.m., Libby was seen on CCTV moving slowly along Beverly Road. And this is right around the corner, only about 3 blocks from her house. And she's kind of dancing on the sidewalk and then making her way across the street to the other side, running right between passing cars. Then she begins running down the street. Later, Amelia explained one reason that she believed Libby did this, because anytime she felt like an inconvenience, even though she wasn't, she would get very emotional and she would go on a walk to let off some steam. It's just on this particular night, she was also intoxicated, and she wasn't alone in the sense that somebody was watching her. Then on the CCTV, it shows her once again sitting down on the sidewalk, and later, she could be seen laying on the ground. Clearly, she wasn't feeling well. And if you have never had too much to drink and bowed down to the porcelain god, I applaud you. But it happens. And when she stood up, she struggled to get to her feet, and she appeared to even be disoriented. At around 11:45, the CCTV captured Libby sitting on another bench on Beverly Road, near the entrance to a road that leads to a sports field close to Wellesley Avenue where she lived. She remained there for several minutes, and during that period of time, multiple vehicles passed through that area, and one of those vehicles was a silver car, which was captured on footage driving along Beverly Road at approximately 11:46 p.m. Now, that same car was seen passing Libby's location at least 4 times in the following minutes. 4. Back and forth. At around 11:48 p.m. to 11:50 p.m., Libby was seen leaving the bench and walking unsteadily along Beverly Road towards the direction of her home. Anyone watching this could think, wait, she's going to make it after all. We know she didn't. Investigators knew that she didn't. And after that sighting, she briefly disappeared from one camera, but reappeared on another. But the final clear CCTV footage of Libby that was recorded at approximately 11:53 p.m. showed her near the same bench, near the Oak Road area that leads to the entrance of the playing fields. Shortly after this, she was no longer visible on any footage the investigators could find at that time. Watching that was like watching someone's final moments. And it's sad because you are helpless. All you can do is imagine what happened next. Even Steve, the cab driver, said that when he heard everything that was happening, he wished that he could have done something different that night, but there was just no way to know that Libby would vanish. By Sunday, the 3rd of February, Upper Side Police said they had significant concerns for Libby's safety. Detective Superintendent Matt Hutchinson told the media, "Libby is a vulnerable young woman, and we are extremely concerned for her welfare." Now, that word vulnerable was used repeatedly in press briefings about Libby's disappearance. Officers made it very clear they believed she had been at risk in the moments before she vanished, and she was. The search escalated quickly, with more than 100 officers now involved. Special search teams combed through open land, gardens, and alleyways. Divers searched part of the river Hull and nearby waterways, despite the freezing winter conditions. They also searched the partially frozen Beverly and Bardstown drains for evidence. Drones were flying overhead, along with police helicopters that were deployed for air searches. And there were sniffer dogs that were brought in to look at this whole area. There were officers with chainsaws cutting down areas of tall grass to see if Libby had passed out and was deep beneath it, or worse. Officers checked trash bins and outbuildings, and they even asked the residents to review private CCTV and dashcam footage from the night of Thursday, the 31st of January, all the way to the 2nd of February. They wanted residents to check their sheds and any buildings on their property for any signs of the missing student, thinking maybe, just maybe, she sought out some shelter in the cold and was just stuck somewhere and in need of medical attention. Her friend Ryan couldn't wait around. He searched areas on his own, even ones the police had already gone over, and he didn't care, because maybe they missed something. The whole town was buzzing with intense search efforts. Reporters from various news stations had moved in as well. Even news stations from across the nation had picked up this story. And Libby's parents, Russell and Lisa, finally made it to Hull, and they were also thrust into the spotlight. They made very emotional public pleas on TV. Her mom said, "Libby, if you see this, please get in touch. We just want to know you're safe." Her father added, "We just want our beautiful daughter back." They described her as kind, thoughtful, and deeply loved. And they urged anyone who had seen her to please come forward. Imagine how that feels as a parent. We try so hard to protect our children, even our adult children. Because to us, they're always going to be our babies. For days, Hull was covered in posters and digital signs, with Libby's picture even on trucks with big screens, with all of her information driving down local streets. I've never seen this related to a missing person, only ads in LA for like alcohol or food, and it's such a better use for it, in my opinion. Students shared her image online. Local businesses displayed missing persons flyers in their windows. And as the days passed without any word, friends, neighbors, and even complete strangers held vigils. Photos show them standing together in the city, holding candles, and trying to keep Libby's name out there and drawing attention to her disappearance. Now, all of this prompted a young woman who was in the same area in the early morning hours of Friday, February 1st to come forward. Her name's Beth. She was also a college student walking home after hanging out with friends at a nearby pub, and she saw Libby. She said she was crying. She asked her what was wrong, and Libby told her she couldn't find Wellesley Avenue, so Beth showed her where to go from their location. But right after Beth walked away, she saw Libby walking in the wrong direction, going back towards the pub. So she tried yelling out to her to tell her that's not right, but Libby must not have heard her over the traffic, because she never stopped. But Beth needed to get home as well, so she just kept going on her way. Now that bench, where Libby was last seen on CCTV, it was pivotal to this case. Reporters would stand in front of it, hoping someone would remember her when they walked by or they were driving past it, remember seeing her that night. It was part of the story of her disappearance. Like, this is where she was. Her mother said someone had to have seen something. There had to have been a camera that caught her next move. She didn't just vanish, but it really seemed like she had. The public was outraged because they felt the police were not doing enough. Doesn't that sound familiar? And everyone had a theory, an opinion. They were all armchair detectives, so to speak, in the comments on social media, thinking that they could do a better job than the authorities. And of course, there was a ton of victim blaming. And that's why I told you that this is not her fault. It was so hard for Libby's loved ones to read these nasty comments about Libby. Like, she shouldn't have been drinking. She put this on herself. This should be a lesson to all women who are out there going out and partying too much, and the list goes on. Her friends were pissed because this could have been any one of them. It didn't matter to them whether she was drinking or not. But then the public was also coming down on all of her friends, saying, who leaves their friend all alone to get home by themselves like that? And it got worse. Libby's guy friend, Ryan, he was being pinned as the perpetrator, and there hadn't even been evidence that a crime occurred, but they were saying he made her go missing. He should be arrested. You might ask why? Well, you know why. The online analysis of his every interview, every move, his body language, which these so-called experts in the comment sections would point out. Others latched on, saying that they could spot all of his red flags. And anytime he was asked about Libby, they said, look, he gets defensive. Everyone already felt bad enough. They didn't want this extra scrutiny on them. But I understand why people pointed fingers at her friends. But soon, the focus would be off of all of them entirely. Officers searched Libby's house. They looked through her bedroom. It was tidy. Nothing was out of place. And it really hurt me. It hurt my heart. Her mom left her a note just in case she came back. It read, Libby, we're here looking for you. Call me, my darling. Love you. Love, Mommy. Libby's dad, Russell, said that his wife and daughter were so close. They were like one being. And Lisa tried to explain what it felt like to know that her daughter was missing. And she said it so well that I want to repeat it to you. She said, you know that feeling you get in your gut when you turn around for a second in a grocery store and you don't see your child? Your stomach drops. Imagine that feeling constantly, and it never goes away. I have never heard anyone describe it like that, but you could tell that Lisa was such a loving person. There she was, a parent with so many questions, and yet she took the time to comfort all of Libby's friends, to hug each of them and ask how they were doing. And that just goes to show you what kind of person raised Libby and where she got her kindness. Lisa did not blame any of Libby's friends. She knew all of them, and she knew how much Libby cared about them. By Monday, the 4th of February, 2019, which ironically was Libby's dad's birthday, police confirmed the search had become the largest missing person investigation Humberside police had ever undertaken. Officers said they were keeping an open mind, but admitted they were increasingly concerned that she had come to harm. Those were their exact words. I mean, most of us who follow true crime know the first 48 hours are the most crucial. They were trying to narrow down what streets they should pull more footage from, and they determined that she had never made it to Wellesley, obviously. She never made it home. That was her street. And she didn't make it to Cunningham Road, I'm showing you on the map, because that was the main road, and they had a ton of footage from there, and they never saw her. So they focused on the last street, Hayworth. They were asking residents to please turn over any camera footage. And after 6 days had passed, and out of seemingly nowhere, police announced on Wednesday, the 6th of February, they had arrested the driver of a silver car that was seen repeatedly on the initial CCTV footage that I showed you from the night of Libby's disappearance. The driver's name is going to be familiar to you, but it wasn't to police. It was Pavel Relovich. He was arrested on suspicion of being responsible for Libby's abduction. I told you his car had passed her 4 times. That's not just passing through the small town. That is watching. That's praying. That's deciding on his next move. And police moved quickly to secure and search Pavel's silver Astra, as well as his family home. And meanwhile, the media was heating up with headlines. There was one that said, Libby Squire, police search home of Polish butcher, with Pavel's name and face plastered everywhere. Libby's loved ones saw what the media was doing, dubbing him as the butcher. But he was. It wasn't just for headlines, it was factual. But to them, it sounded like the title of a horror movie. They thought this was probably the wrong guy. It seemed too soon, too quick, too much of a hunch. And meanwhile, that car was taken for a full forensic examination. I'm talking swabbing the interior, the seats, the footwells, the trunk space. Mud from the tires and undercarriage was collected. And it was going to be compared to soil from locations that were relevant to this investigation. Fibers were lifted from the vehicle. They were bagged for examination, and officers also seized clothing and shoes that they suspected he wore the night Libby disappeared. There was one other critical detail that officers documented when Pavel was first brought into custody. They noticed visible scratch marks on his face. That's not a good sign. They were photographed and recorded as part of the custody process. In documentation, they were described as fresh and consistent with fingernail scratches. It appeared as though he was in some kind of struggle. Now, inside the trunk of the car, wait till you hear this, they found a pink duffel bag, and that definitely looked out of place. It was not his wife's. And guess what it contained? Items that had been reported stolen during those burglaries in the area. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? The list of items found included several pairs of used women's underwear, adult toys, and a number of bottles of lube. And then there were photos of women that were not his wife in various stages of undress. The items matched reports made by victims dating back all the way to 2017 and 2018. So this is connecting the dots. But inside his home was a different story. It was a normal family house. Nothing stood out, except digital devices were seized, including a drone and phones and storage banks and a computer. Now, I don't know how they decided to look inside the computer tower, the actual tower, but they unscrewed it, they took off the top, and there were more pairs of dirty women's underwear. Very strange. When asked who the women were in these pictures that were found in that bag within his trunk, he said he didn't know. When pressed about the panties, or as they put it, the soiled knickers and other items in his possession and why he had them, he would not elaborate. He just kept saying, no comment. But they didn't need him to speak. GPS data was examined, and his phone placed him repeatedly in the Beverly Road and Newland Avenue areas late at night over a sustained period of time. Years, in fact. The same area Libby had been walking. This data matched the pattern of the robberies and voyeurism that were already reported. When officers looked at previous CCTV footage from dates of crimes, they were able to watch his same silver car prowling the streets in the early hours of the night. And in some cases, DNA recovered from windows and entry points of women's homes matched Pavel's DNA. It was this forensic link that allowed police to formally connect him to those other cases, the offenses from the past I told you about. But if only they would have done that before. But still, to their credit, they would not have had a suspect to compare it to. It's only when he's arrested that they take his DNA and it's in the system. When he was interviewed about Libby's disappearance, Pavel denied any involvement. But at that stage, the police had strong evidence when it came to the earlier offenses, so they focused their efforts there because they wanted to get him on something. They could put him at the scenes. They could connect him to the stolen property, even to specific addresses and to dates and times through CCTV, phone data, and like I said, DNA in some cases, and we'll get to that. He had committed offenses all around Libby's neighborhood, almost on several streets in one cluster. And then there were a few a bit north. But yet, it does make you wonder how they didn't think these were all connected at the time. Now they had the physical evidence and DNA. They had the victims who reported what had happened. But what they didn't have was evidence linking him to Libby. And that's frustrating because everything's lining up. They really felt like they had their man. I want to go in a little more detail about something I told you earlier. There had been 2 college students who just called the police 11 days before Libby vanished. This recent exposure, it was reported. They were coming home at night. They saw a man standing by their apartment, watching them, and they noticed he was inappropriately touching himself. So they ran inside, and later, seminal fluid was found right on their front door. This is what I meant by DNA. That's the type of DNA that eventually was matched to Pavel. Police knew that he could flee back to Poland if they did not put him in jail. And that's why they moved so fast. It made me sick because when they picked him up and they put him in the police car that morning, he laughed like it didn't even faze him. Weeks after Pavel's arrest, He was charged with 9 counts of burglary, voyeurism, and outraging public decency related to those offenses committed between June 2017 and January 2019. Remember, though, voyeurism is not simply peeping or peeking at someone without them knowing it. It's a boundary violation. These are not harmless acts in case you thought they were, but I'm thinking you probably don't. In fact, in many of these cases, including this one, they are a rehearsal for what the offender really wants to achieve. When he was looking at those college students and they ran inside and he did what he did at their door, that's an exercise in control without someone's consent. He's controlling what happens. That's power. And it's access. He's getting closer and closer. Next, it would have been inside someone's home doing that same thing, but with them. Do you catch my drift? The progression shows a shift from distance to closeness, from watching to physically intruding on people, from a fantasy to an act. But charging Pavel with these offenses didn't give them any justice or answers about what happened to Libby, but it did get a dangerous and escalating offender off the streets in the meanwhile, if it's any consolation. But to Libby's parents, it wasn't. Because where was she? Those behaviors the investigators finally linked were the ones we've already talked about, that escalation pathway. The ones that are not minor or gross, they're serious. And all the police can do right now is try to build a compelling case in the background. But they had not pressed any charges relating to Libby's disappearance. When they were asked whether this man that they took into custody was responsible for Libby's disappearance, they refused to comment on whether they thought he was involved. All they would say is that the investigation is ongoing. And I know how much the public hates that phrase, but they couldn't talk right now, and you're going to know why. Weeks then passed, and Libby's family still had no answers. But what police had not let out to the public was that there was a much more CCTV footage than what they had released. Of course there was. We see this all the time after the fact. Remember Brian Koberger? The police were so slow to release details, and it looked like the case was at a standstill, but it wasn't. And right now, the Nancy Guthrie case, I assume it's the same story, that they're letting out bits and pieces of footage, leaking them as they go along, but they're not going to tell us what's up their sleeve. And this shouldn't come as a surprise. Investigators will often hold back key information in order to capture their offender or to prove their case when it goes to court. And in Libby's case, the police had publicly shared that Pavel's car had been seen multiple times in the area. That was true. But they didn't let the public know that at 12:08 a.m. on Friday the 1st of February 2019, the night that Libby was walking the streets, CCTV placed her inside of his car. Yeah, that was withheld. Moments earlier, that footage, which was really grainy, it was black and white, it was hard to see since the camera had a cobweb hanging right in front of the lens. It showed what was later identified as Pavel's silver car pulling up and parking on Hayworth Street. Remember, that was the last street police were going to get information, and they went around. Well, a building that had a garage had a camera facing the road. I have this footage. I'm showing it to you. Pavel is seen leaving his vehicle, and FYI, if you are watching and you're from the US, you might be thinking, wait, that's the passenger side. Just remember, in Europe, it's reversed. After this, Pavel makes his way to Beverly Road, and he is seen walking past where Libby was on that bench. She would have been in that area during this time, but they were not seen crossing paths. Instead, he returned to his car, opened the door, and then he just sits inside. It looked like he was on his phone, maybe looking around, just sitting there with his legs hanging out of the open car door, just waiting. And then he stands up, he looks around the street back and forth, and once again, he locks his car and he heads to Beverly Road. At this point, Libby is walking down that same street, and he seems to be on a mission. And we know that he was. And what's eerie is that on one side of the road is Libby, and on the other side is Pavel. And every time she walks, he follows her from his side. And then all of a sudden, he makes his first move. He runs across Beverly Road and is trying to catch up to Libby. And she has no idea that she's being watched, followed, already violated, because just like Laura, who was watched through her open window without her knowledge, Libby didn't know her personal boundaries were being crossed. Investigators watching this footage were stunned. Libby had been hunted. When Pavel finally caught up to her, he makes contact. He acts as though he's helping her, steadying her. We will never know what he said to her, but he's close to her age. He doesn't look evil, so to speak. He has children of his own, so he probably knows how to be fatherly, how to be helpful and reassuring. He may have told her, "I'm going to help you find your way home." He may have smiled and been friendly and gently guided her. But all of these things were done not to ensure that she got home safe, but to make sure she didn't. And that's sick. It's evil. It's not human. A few minutes later, on the previous CCTV camera pointing towards Pavel's car, a pair of legs are seen getting into the passenger side. This is Libby. And then moments later, Pavel jumps into the driver's seat and pulls away. Now, the exact mechanics of how Libby got into this vehicle, whether she was persuaded, promised something, told he was a cop, who knows? It's never going to be 100% clear, especially from grainy CCTV footage alone where we can only see part of his car. But it did show that Pavel was in close proximity to Libby at a critical moment that night. That should tell you enough, because you know who he really is behind the facade that he shows to the world. And from 12:08 a.m., that vehicle is tracked on CCTV footage going towards the area of Libby's house. And for a moment, the investigators could have wondered, was this man taking her home? But the car passed her street and kept going, making a 3-minute drive to Oak Road playing fields. At 12:11, the car is captured arriving at the fields, and then at 12:19, it's captured leaving the area. There's no further signs of Libby Squire. That 8-minute window, 12:11 to 12:19, is an incredibly short time, and yet those 8 minutes changed everything. She went into those fields, and she never came out. And what's really terrifying is that when all the tips were coming in, there was a caller who lived right in this area, and they said they thought they heard screaming around midnight, but they thought it could be a fox or other wildlife. And still they called, just in case. And officers did go out to that location to see if they saw any fox or animals nearby, but they didn't. And at the time, nothing else stood out. They were simultaneously trying to track down the driver of this silver car. The police had all this information, but they only made public the fact they saw this silver car that they linked to Pavel in the same area where Libby went missing. That's all the public knew. We now know they believe Pavel was responsible for her disappearance because now we're seeing what they knew. But at that stage, they only had enough evidence to charge him in relation to those other offenses. In the meantime, they continued working behind the scenes, reviewing more footage, analyzing forensic results, combing through every inch of that field, searching the waterways behind the field. Divers even searched this retention pond nearby, and all of this was happening while they were sharing very little publicly. But that search turned up nothing. They started to theorize that Libby may have been thrown into the river hole behind the fields. The banks were being heavily searched and analyzed, but not only the way you're probably picturing. They had to know how long it would take, theoretically, for someone of Libby's height and weight to be carried, pulled, or dragged out to that field from a vehicle, violated, and then thrown into the water. So they got a weighted mannequin, kind of remind me of the Karen Reed trial. They used a weighted mannequin to test this. They wanted to see how far someone could get in that small window of time when she disappeared into those fields. And they concluded 6 to 8 minutes. The possibility that this is what happened was both a huge lead, but also horrifying, because I'm showing you the river. It winds through the city, and then it dumps into the Humber, a major 40-mile-long tidal estuary that flows out to the North Sea. the sea. A vast, almost endless body of water. The river hole where they believe Libby could have been thrown in was fast moving. It was 6 miles per hour, and it's 18 miles to the Humber. So that's 3 hours' time, and Libby would have been carried into that huge estuary. And then the Humber flows at the same speed, around 6 miles an hour. Its job is to drain into the sea. It's about 22 miles to get there. So in another 4 hours, Libby could have been way out there. And that means by 10 a.m., while everyone was searching the streets, Libby could be in the sea. And when they told her parents, it's almost as though Lisa knew. And she actually did. Believe what you will, but on the way into Hull, after Libby went missing, they were driving and they passed the Humber. And when she looked into that water, she turned to her husband and she said, "She's in there." And Russell was like, "Don't be silly." And she told him, "I'm not. I'm being serious." She said she had a very strong feeling that that's where Libby already was and that she wasn't alive. But now she had to at least hold on to hope until that was proven. Talk about a mother's intuition. But investigators were working around the clock. They were actually overworked. They weren't getting to go home to their families. They were exhausted, but they did not give up. They knew they couldn't. I want to bring you back to where they were in the investigation. They were trying really hard to identify the man who drove the silver car that Libby got into. They were scouring CCTV footage. They were trying to pinpoint the make and model, and they were finally able to figure out it was an Astra, and they used traffic cameras to find all of them in that vicinity that night. And it narrowed it down to 80. But guess what? They couldn't read the license plate. So nothing moved this forward. They were finally going back to the night of the crime, and they found one restaurant footage. It was called Chicken George's, and they had really, really good CCTV footage. They were hoping they could just read a little bit of that silver Astra's plate, the one that kept driving around when Libby was walking. But unfortunately, I think you can tell from this photo, it was not readable. They tracked this car, though, for hours, just seeing where he went next, snaking all around town. And it's crazy, because at 2:24 a.m., he's making his way back to Oak Road, towards the fields, the place where he went and Libby never came out. He was down there for a few minutes, and then his car reappeared on the main road. And finally, after tracking him for hours, he turned down Raglan Street at 3 o'clock in the morning. And he never drove back out. So that is how they narrowed down who was driving that car. But it gets even better, because as they're watching the footage from right around that time, they see a man walking from Raglan right after this, and he goes past where? Chicken George's. And you know they have good cameras. At 3:09 a.m., they got their very first glimpse of Pavel. All they had to do was link his image to the silver Astra parked at his house on Raglan, and they nailed him. That's what led to them confirming his identity. However, they weren't ready to move in and arrest him yet, and they wouldn't have if it wasn't for the damn media. I told you, it's a blessing and a curse. We love the media. We love reports on everything. We want to keep up with cases like this, but the media was pushing to release the CCTV footage of Libby getting into his car. Yep, they were watching police. They saw them go to that garage and ask for CCTV footage, so the media did too. And the building owner, who wanted to make some cash, sold them the footage. The investigators knew if that footage got out, it would compromise everything. It would tip off this perpetrator, and they had to move fast, even though they weren't ready to. So that's why the next morning they knock on his door, and they are stunned, because a woman answers, his wife. When they ask to speak to the man of the house, he comes out with 2 young children, and it's unbelievable. They thought, we have the wrong house. There's just no way this normal-looking guy hurt Libby. But they take him in for questioning. And I told you, he denied any involvement. Well, first of all, he needed a translator because he did not speak very good English. They explained why they arrested him. They asked him if he was involved in any way, and he said he can only tell them what he remembered that he did that night. He said, yes, he parked his car on Hayworth, and he got out to go on a run to lose weight. And he added that this was something he always did. It's kind of odd to run in a place like that, don't you think? A random residential neighborhood that's 5 minutes from his own house. And why not run during normal hours at maybe a park?
Zostawiłem sobie samochód na tej ulicy, gdzie tam mówiłem wtedy.
I parked my car on that street, Hayworth, I think.
No i trochę się pościągałem przy samochodzie.
So I did my warm-up in the car.
No i wyszłem na ten chodnik tutaj, z tej ulicy na chodnik
So I got out of the car and I went into the pavement.
Remember how he was sitting in his car? He called that his warm-up for his run, that he was stretching. That's beyond creepy. Because yeah, it was a warm-up all right, but not for working out. He actually admits to seeing Libby and speaking with her. He said that she told him to stop and that she needed help. She was crying and telling him she needed to go home and call her mother.
Hey man, stop please. I need help. I need go home. I need call my mother.
And what's sad is that part is probably true. So now we have some insight into how scared poor Libby was. She just wanted her mother. She just wanted to make it home. Then he told investigators that he felt sorry for her. And he told her he had a car. And if she just gives him her address, he can drive her home. She follows him to his car. He gets her to get inside. He says he put the seatbelt on her, and he's acting like he's so caring, like, oh, I buckled her in. He said she felt better because it was warm inside the car, and that makes me so heartbroken for her. It's a moment of comfort before the last moment she will ever feel anything again.
And she
Weszła do samochodu.
walked up to the car, she got inside the car.
No i zapytałem jej pasy.
And I fastened seatbelts on her.
But he said on the way there, she asked him to stop. He thinks it was on Oak Road because she said she needed to throw up. And he didn't want to get a mess inside of his vehicle. So he pulled over and he told her to get out. He actually told them she fell, and he could tell she was only wearing a miniskirt and no tights. That's an interesting fact, you pervert.
Somewhere here. She started to do like this, as if she wanted to vomit.
No tak robi znowu. Ja mówię,
And
get
she
out my car.
begins to do like that again. So I said, get out of my car.
No i ona wyszła z samochodu i się przewróciła. Na ten śnieg w tych nogach tam.
All that snow in her, her legs.
Ona nie miała, ona miała tylko samą taką miliówkę
She only
tutaj.
had the miniskirt.
Nie miała rajstop na
She
pewno.
did not have. She definitely did not have tights.
He said after that, he made sure she was okay, and he saw her walking on the sidewalk, and he drove away. He even tells them, you can check the cameras. Oh, they had. They had. And though this story was really well thought out, they didn't believe it. Even though it fits so nicely in what could be seen on the footage, they know better. So what they do is they go back in time and check more footage all the way back to 9 p.m. And he stops at a gas station. They can see that he's wearing jeans. That's not jogging clothes. Oh, and his drone footage. Yes, his own drone footage that they confiscated from his house. It showed that he was flying his drone right over the same area of the fields where Libby was taken. Now, this was before he abducted her, so think about that. He was scoping out that area. Look how clear this footage is. There's the monster putting his drone in flight. And there it goes, soaring over Hull.
All right, guys, it is showtime at BetMGM Casino, so grab their new player offer and enjoy the